Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ned. Today I'm going to talk about Open Data Kit. Now, Open Data Kit has been a project at the University of Washington for many years. It's a combination of a lot of people's work. It's not just my work. There's a whole bunch of people who went into this. Really, Open Data Kit was the idea of focusing on an environment that we often don't think about in mobile tools. It's an environment where there's no power, no water. But the interesting thing, one thing they do have is mobile phones. And there's often you hear about mobile first. I like to call it mobile only. That's their only computing device they have. And how do we build software frameworks to help them leverage their simple computing devices they have? So here is a graph from the World Bank. And this is really interesting when you look at global development, because we've been working on global development for 50 to 100 years. And mobile phones now have leapfrogged all international interventions. There are more people with access to phones than there are access to clean water. However, you'll notice that internet and mobile broadband are not on that same track. And so, one thing to keep in mind when we talk about mobile phones and these disconnected environments is that just because they have access to a mobile phone does not mean they have access to the internet. And that is why Open Data Kit spent a lot of time thinking about disconnected operation. And we really built a framework that basically says disconnected operation first. Here's another graph from the World Bank that helps break it down. So about 7.4 billion people in the world, 3.2 of them have access to the internet. The other 3 billion do not. Of course, this data was published in 2016, collected in 2015, which probably means it's 2014 data. But billions of people in the last 3 years did not just get internet. And so that's really the focus. So Open Data Kit started out with a simple idea that these organizations were using a lot of paper, and we basically designed a simple tool to replace survey forms with basically Excel or a drop and drag tool that they could sign their survey, have it auto-render in the smartphone in a disconnected environment, and then automatically have a server generated based off just defining a survey. So basically we shifted what people will consider a programming language to just creating a survey. Now, ODK has been, I would say, extremely successful. I'm biased, but just to give some brief numbers, in the last 2 months, just because I don't always like to be like, in the last 5 years, we've hit most countries. Just in the last 2 months, it's been used in 177 countries out of 193. Those would be UN-defined countries, like if you have Google, Google does territories, and whether or not those territories are countries, this global debate that I'm trying to get out of. So let's just go with what the UN defines. But interestingly, 130 different countries constantly daily reports that we get back. But what the bigger interesting thing is this has become a platform for people to build products on top of. So Survey CTO is an example, Kobo Toolbox is something that's sponsored by the UN. And those I don't even get counts for. So everything you see, because that's their proprietary stuff, we're open source. So everything you see here are probably the low end of the numbers, the extreme low end of the numbers. There are also more than 50 companies that basically just run a business that's supporting ODK around the world, because obviously a bunch of graduate students at the University of Washington do not scale well. I used ODK website as a sign over time. So you can see the graph slowly getting bigger and bigger and bigger over the many years it's been released since late 2010. We put up the website. We actually first released it without a website, of course, being good graduate students. But one thing I did want to highlight, as you can see the trends now, 10,000 different sessions, basically per week. But I pulled up last week's session data to show you the top 10 countries where the kids are coming from. And that actually is something that I like to see, is the US, of course, is number one, because a lot of development agencies there, that's where development's done, but you'll see a lot of Africa and Asia, and not a lot of the standard European countries, except for the UK made the list last week. But, again, these numbers you're seeing are actually smaller, because those 10,000 people visiting our website are more what you would call deployment architects. So one observation that happened with Open Data Kit is we often talk about the application layer, there's the software developers, there's an end user, but we often don't talk about the deployment architect. And in these organizations, there's often some person tasked as their business job. Okay, you're going to set up a survey, send field workers out, and capture this data. So the 10,000 you're seeing hitting our website are mostly those type people. And those type people generally are in charge of maybe 10 people, maybe 100 people, maybe 1,000 people. And often they don't actually use Google Play, they just plug it in and do the install on the laptop because again, we have disconnected environments first. So one of the big tensions that exists, I think, in this space is the idea of software platforms that are flexible, and I think a good exemplar of that is Microsoft Office. And then I will use another exemplar, a very customized software. Those of you in the US are aware of our ever-growing medical information systems, Epic. And there's a real push between the two. Now, it takes a lot of money and energy to make something super customized, but it makes it a lot easier to deal with. Something that's super flexible is not as easy to deal with, but it can be reused in many, many different domains. And this is something that we noticed when building Open Data Kit, was the fact that people used Excel a lot. People used Word a lot, because it didn't matter what domain it is. The Red Cross uses Excel. A doctor in Kenya uses Excel. And so we really followed that model. And so when people ask me quickly, what is the successes of Open Data Kit, I often point to three things. It started in 2009. It's domain-independent tools, which means we always have at least 5 to 10 domains we're targeting at once when designing it. We focus on disconnected operation, and we target that deployment architect. And then we have a lot of great success with Open Data Kit 1, and then everyone's basically like, this is great, we want more, which is where Open Data Kit 2 came in. So as an example, last week I was actually in Europe, Greece, at the in actual Syrian refugee camps for the case study. You'll see me in the red vest down there in the bottom, what is that, left-hand corner? Yeah. You'll not see me in any of the pictures because refugees, I can't get the pictures without being improved. But what they were doing is they were registering everyone using Open Data Kit. You can see that in the upper right-hand corner. They would give out distributions, as you can see in the bottom right-hand corner. Here's another shot of the distributions. And what if they've got paper there, but if you look closely, I circled in yellow here, they have 2 smartphones. They're actually using Open Data Kit, and they're super annoyed that Open Data Kit doesn't have the features necessary to actually do what they need to do. They have to register people, and they have to give them benefits. There's a whole set of things that was missing. And so that was really the idea for Open Data Kit 2. And in fact, this paper talks about really some of the iterative process that we went through, doing surveys in previous publications, we're doing pilots in 18 different countries, and we went through a significant redesign to the first idea paper back at Hot Mobile back in 2012. A lot of redesign. We have 6 exemplar use cases here, but to be succinct, a lot of people want bi-directional communication, a lot of people want to track people over a longer time. And basically, just thinking about that paper workflow replacement didn't really fill that needs. So another case study that we are underway is eliminate dengue. This is the idea that if you infect mosquitoes with, I'm not going to try to pronounce that, but it's a bacteria, you can actually stop the spread of dengue and Zika and other things. So this is scaling out around the world. They go in, they infect mosquitoes, they then do disease-borne vector tracking, so they have to have updated, the workers come back to the station every day, synchronize their phones, go back out, track the mosquitoes, turn them in to laboratories. And right now it's in ODK2s in 5 countries. Of course, it's going to continue to scale, but right now, of course, all this stuff is still pilot stage. And that's one thing about working in this space in global development. Deployments always take longer than they really should think I'm going to. Another example we'll quickly cover is that in Kenya, HIV is a big problem in Africa. People want to track patients over time and vary their care. They've tried to run studies and they've had to keep them very, very simple because of the paper records. And using Open Data Kit has allowed, in at least 5 clinics, them to do random clinical control trials to determine what sorts of treatments are actually working, what gets them actually to come back to the medication, those kinds of things. And there's a quote here at the bottom that I'll read. Well, I won't read, but it's basically saying it's that longitudinal follow-up, but that longitudinal follow-up in disconnected environments is really the key. and disconnected first. So, just to look at the architecture differences, Open Data Kit 1 had a really simple architecture. It basically filled out, designed a form, it's a file, you basically sent out a worker, that worker filled in information, it came back as a file. And this was actually a request by the organizations because they didn't trust us. They had been burned by so many consulting firms who put it in proprietary database formats, there was no trust. And so we put it in files, which is great. But then they asked for more things like bidirectional synchronization, and we're like, well, computer science says that's a bad idea to do in files. So of course, we make something way more complicated out of K2. We make 5 different frameworks, get bidirectional syncing going, and all kinds of things. So let's talk about some of the things that came in Open Data Kit 2. There was all these people, we want to connect pulse ox and sensors, so we made the sensors framework. Then they were like, we want complex medical workflows that can do arbitrary things. So then we created another framework called Survey to help them do verification and complex work. I want to see all that patient data, or I want to see all that data I collected yesterday. So then we made a rendering framework. And again, we broke these out into smaller tools so that the mental load for how to work with all this stuff would be less. Scan is the idea to bridge paper-digital. Paper's not going away. Can we do object mark recognition? This was, of course, not my work. This was done by one of my fellow PhD students, Ricky Dell, who's now faculty at Cornell. Then also, wait, sometimes I have SMS, sometimes I have 3G, sometimes I have Wi-Fi. How can I optimize my data? So, some of the lessons we learned here, and we've always been very, very focused on modularity. And that was the idea that by building these separate frameworks, we could put all these frameworks together, keep them separate. Well, we actually went a little too far going off the deep end of modularity because we made them all very separate apps, and guess what? We ended up with sporadic database logs and all that stuff between things you would expect to have happen. The users were very happy because they weren't asking, why do I have to install this extra thing to run service-oriented architectures and things like that? So we didn't do that, and there's performance testing in the paper if you want to look. It basically added 150 milliseconds of overhead to our user's experience, which is negligible. One thing that was really helpful was the idea of database-centric first. So we basically made a database as the central platform that everything communicates on. And this, well, there's the epic debate of databases versus documents, or row-based databases documents. We found that row-based databases were better because it forced them to think about things up front. So the reason why is, for example, they didn't just collect data and then not know how to do it, because a lot of them aren't programmers, so if they just collect random data, then they have to hire someone to do post-processing. So if they think about it up front. They can also have to worry about conflicts between one worker and another worker. They also think through how to separate it so it's not all the same database row into the synchronization process. And also, they can more quickly discern what data is important and have those rows synchronized and other rows not synchronized. So, of course, this worked well for us, and some of the actual things that happened was there was one deployment in Pakistan where they just had horrible bandwidth, and by us synchronizing rows, we were synchronizing like 10,000 rows at a time, and we took it down to like 10, and that solved their bad networking conditions. So actually having smaller grain stuff that's adjustable is really, really helpful, and if we have big document databases, we wouldn't be able to do that. And also having small grains allows for, if a conflict happens, if worker in village A makes an update and another worker comes into village A later, if they talk to different people, we were able to keep a small set of differences between them, because it's just what's in that row. And by exposing the row, we actually help them think through those processes. So, Open Data Kit provides a modular set of frameworks for resource-constrained environments. And of course, when we mean resource-constrained environments, we take a different approach. We try to turn the constraints on its head and say, okay, disconnect is the most important. This paper reflects some lessons learned about building a real system for real organizations and challenge the disconnected environments. And with that,